It's Ross, and this is really, truly going to be a nice little update to the grow closet. I think the results are evident of some of the things I mentioned to you guys last week. We talked about fungus gnats. We talked about changing the environment in here just slightly to get some of these cuttings going that were just sitting here for a month or a month and a half. And we also talked about, I think we talked about feeding them. So I want to talk a little bit about feeding them, and I want to just give a little bit of an update of all the recommendations I had made. So the first recommendation was getting rid of the fungus gnats, or giving this little trap here, setting this up. You basically get yourself a nice little bowl. Fill that up with half of it should be apple cider vinegar, the other half's water, and then a squirt of dish soap. And in here, the results are pretty apparent. This is roughly about 30 of these fungus gnats. That's pretty good. It's only been about a week, as I've said. You know, this is only really an update from a week ago. Things have really started to grow. And it kind of really reminds me of the growth that occurs outside in the heat of the summer. Because what I've been doing, and I mentioned this, is that we're going to close this door at some point. We're going to keep this shut for the most part. And once I shut this door, the temperature in here goes way up to 90. I can't seem to get it any warmer than 90, but 90 is incredible. And certainly at that temperature, these fig trees just go bonkers. Even the fertilizer has certainly really helped. I think the combination of the two, you know, if I were to attribute this to one particular thing, it'd probably be the temperature rather than the fertilizer. I know the fertilizer certainly makes these things grow. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But the temperature in here going from, you know, 79, 80 degrees to 80, that's just like monstrous. Fig trees love that temperature. And as a result, things have just been going nuts. Like every single thing in here has new growth and is continuing to have new growth. Some things in here, by the way, I know it's tough to get a nice little angle in here for you guys, but some of these things, like this one here, wasn't doing a damn thing. And that's because we changed the temperature in here from 80 to 90. And we did this a couple days this week. We maybe did this for about 2 to 4 hours, raising the temperature from 80 to 90. I didn't want to do it too much because I still have some freshly rooted trees in here, or freshly rooted cuttings that haven't had a chance to callus up. If temperatures are too warm in here, that callousing process could turn into rot, and that's not what we want. So we do want to keep the temperatures below 80 or at 80, somewhere between 70 or 80. But for some of these that haven't done a damn thing, some of them are just now getting started. Like look at this one here. Let me show you guys some other examples. There's one back in here. You can see that there. Let's see. There's also one directly behind this tree. I know it's tough. Let's see. And some trees that have just pretty much been sitting here doing nothing for a while just came to life. Like this guy here came to life. This guy down here, it's not very visible, but there is a cutting down here. Really, it was like, you know, a nice little shock for some of these trees. Down here is where I'm seeing the most impressive growth. This stuff's really just insane. Between the heat and the fertilizer, these have just gone nuts. Some of these guys have figs on them, and probably the best example here is my Azores Dark. Azores Dark just continues to put out fruit at a stupidly young age. It fruits so much that the thing barely grows, and it's just actually kind of annoying in that way. But I've already taken off like 6 figs off of this little tree. I'm not even kidding. It just puts out so much fruit. Other varieties I've seen that want a fruit is the Black Madeira KK. You can see that down in here. You know, they're very precocious varieties, I would say, Azores Dark and Black Madeira. It doesn't really take a whole lot of heat for them to start putting out some fruit. these things really want to put out fruit at a young age, even though it's not something we want. And what I am going to end up doing is I probably will leave on like 1 or 2 just to see what's going to happen. If these trees can even handle it, you know, if with enough food, maybe I can make that work. But the rest of them, I'm not going to leave them on. I do also want to point out another thing here before we get into the fertilizer, is that I could pinch these as an example and get fruit off of these. Now you can see right in here, I know that's tough to see, but there's 2 dots. We talk about pinching quite a bit, but right above this leaf stem is the 2 dots. And you see there one clearly on the left, but the one on the right is much smaller. If I were to pinch this tree right here, which I could, I would get fruit forming in that location. I would be very shocked if I didn't see fruit actually naturally form on this particular tree within the next couple weeks. But that really goes to show just how precocious some of these varieties are. This one is certainly an early precocious variety, no doubt. Just by looking at this, I can certainly tell. Whereas other varieties like this one as an example have just been growing for quite some time and haven't even thought about putting out fruit, you know. And you can tell that by looking at the nodes, you know, look at the nodes and see, okay, well, what's this variety doing? Some other varieties, I can really tell the same thing and say, okay, this guy just really doesn't want a fruit. Which could be a good or a bad thing, depending on where you live, you know. But let's get on to the fertilizer here, and this is the last thing I think I want to mention in this video, is that we have a 2-gallon jug here. We're putting in a 1.5 teaspoons of fertilizer here, mixing that up, putting in some warm water. I think warm water is key. And then we're watering these plants about every 2 weeks with that. And now it has been a week since I fertilized all these trees, but we're gonna do this back to back, just to make sure that all these trees have some fertilizer in the system there, and their roots. Just a little bit of insurance, I guess. But I don't want to over fertilize these. I want to make sure that this is pretty diluted. I don't want to go much more than this. I may want to back off at a certain point. Really be careful with the fertilizer with such young trees, small root systems. Any of that salt buildup really could not be good for these trees. The concentration of this is Miracle Grow, your standard liquid fertilizer, and it's 24/8/16. So this is perfect for growth. We don't want these guys to fruit, so we have a lower phosphorus. We have a nice little potassium there to help these guys grow, and then we have the nitrogen to really increase the vigor. And that's what you're looking for. You could use an organic fertilizer, but I think if you use an organic fertilizer, it's going to take a lot longer. It's not going to be necessarily something you want in this situation. Also, the fungus gnats really love decaying wet organic material. So adding in more organic fertilizer or more organic material that would be wet is really not going to be a good thing for that scenario. So if you have fungus gnats, probably not a good idea. If you don't, then maybe you can go that route. The last thing I want to mention is that in our process of adjusting the temperature here, before I forget, you know, when we raised the temperatures from 80 to 90 and got a lot of these things going, I had a chance to really look through some of these pots, right? A chance to see, okay, what's alive, what's dead, what needs some focus, what do I need to, you know, check the soil, check this, check that. Really inspect some of these cuttings, right? And a pretty good amount of them in that process, I would say, seem pretty, the hopes for them are pretty low. I have a couple back in here. In this row, I have about 3 right there that don't look like they're going to do anything. But for the rest of these, they look like they're going to show something or some kind of progress in the future, and I just need to wait. But the rest of them I've already taken out of here, and I would say that the success rate thus far is probably somewhere in the 80% range. Maybe 75 to 85, somewhere in there. And I think that's pretty good. I think that's what most people will get. I think my percentage could be a bit higher. Some of the cuttings that I'm accounting for in that percentage are my own cuttings that we tried to salvage that growth from. It was very green, not very lignified. The chances were low to begin with, but we tried it anyway. So you know what? It's not the end of the world. I'm pretty happy with 75-80% in terms of rooting. So getting them to leaf out and put out roots, I'd say I'm probably somewhere around 75 to 85%. Now, again, I've said this in other videos, that doesn't mean that we have succeeded. We still have to let these guys grow out. We have to let them lignify a bit. This is probably the most successful cutting I have, if I can show it to you guys. This guy down in here, his stem, you know, he's continuing to grow, but his stem has lignified for the most part. Now, if this were to dry out for whatever reason, this were to take some damage, this particular tree, this one would be okay, because the wood's lignified here. It can resprout from somewhere down below, and it should be fine, you know. Whereas this really green growth here, if this were to get damaged, this whole bud would probably get ruined, and I'd have to resort to this bud down here as an example. So that's pretty much the update here, guys. I think we're going to do a video on rot. We'll talk a little bit about rot, because that seems to be the biggest issue that a lot of you guys are having, or maybe not my viewers, but people amongst the community still struggle with rot, and it blows my mind. You know, this should really be known, the reasons why you get rot, and I want to make that abundantly clear. But for the most part, you should have a pretty low percentage of rot, and that should be your biggest problem out of everything. You know, out of the cuttings I've lost thus far, it has been mostly because of rot. Very few of them have dried out. That's the other reason there. So whatever I'm doing here in this closet is certainly working really well. We've also got the seeds up here, the seedlings. If you guys haven't seen that video, we started seeds February 1st, so go back and watch that video. Again, hopefully you guys are getting some kind of information out of this little series here that we put together on rooting figs. I don't think there's another series out there like this. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you for tomorrow's video. All right, take care.